Greetings everyone, this is Gulab here, and today I'm going to do a video on understanding the Vedic universe. So I'm going to speak about cosmology from the Vedic perspective from the Bhagavata Purana, also known as Srimad Bhagavatam, and I have been looking for very, very specific perspective and information because there's many different commentaries on Srimad Bhagavatam, and it's very it's very sometimes biased and sometimes very different. Anyways, I was looking for the most authentic source of information. I believe that I found it. So I'm going to go ahead and start this as a part 1. And here we go. According to modern astronomy, our universe is extremely vast, but almost empty. The different stars and planets are separated by such extreme distances that it is practically impossible for one to go from one to the other. There is even doubt if life exists on other planets or if it's just an anomaly that just appeared once on our blue planet. However, the Vedas give a very interesting description of the universe, which is in many aspects much more far out than the wildest science fiction. A universe with multiple dimensions, cosmic passages, and mystic features, based not in matter and physical laws, but on different levels of consciousness. To study the model of the universe given in the Vedas is the key for not only understanding better the complexities and subtleties of our universe, but also to expand and elevate our consciousness. The first point to understand is that the view of the cosmos given by modern science is based on sense perception, or what we can observe using our vision, hearing, etc. It doesn't matter if one tries to observe the universe using his naked eye or a telescope, he will be limited by his senses and intelligence. In the Jyotish Shastras, the Vedas also give a view of the universe very similar to modern science. In the Surya Siddhanta, for example, it describes that the circumference of the earth is 8,000 miles, very close to the modern estimate, that is 7,928 miles. The distance to Mars is estimated in 1.54 AU, astronomical units, again very close to the modern estimate, that is 1.52 AU. The average distance to the moon is given as 415,210 kilometers, close to the modern 384,000 kilometers, and so on. The Surya Siddhanta even hints at the orbit of Uranus, which was discovered only in 1781. Therefore, the view of the universe described by modern science was not unknown to the sages of previous ages. The question is that the Vedas offer something more. Multi-dimensions, the Puranic view of the universe. In the Puranas, the universe is described in a radically different way. Instead of solar systems and galaxies, our universe is organized in several levels of planetary systems which resemble disks, one on top of the other. In the middle, we have Earth and other intermediary planetary systems. In the lower half, we have the lower planetary systems where the Asuras live, while in the upper half, we have the planetary systems where the Devas, as well as very elevated sages, live. In this description, each planetary system resembles a disk, and these different disks are stacked on top of the other, separated by a certain distance. This view of the universe is radically different from what we learn in school, and also different from what we can observe when we look to the sky. How to understand it? The question is that modern astronomy, as well as the Surya Siddhanta, describe the universe according to the sense perception of human beings. what we can perceive using our senses. The Puranas, on the other hand, describes the universe from the point of view of superior beings who have different sets of senses and thus perceive reality in a completely different way than we do. Most of the books in the Vedas were received by humanity from higher beings. Most of them were spoken by divine beings or by inhabitants of the higher planets, while others were spoken by perfect beings from the spiritual realm. The Surya Siddhanta, however, was received from Mayadanava, an architect from the lower planetary systems. Being interested in matter and not in spirituality, he gave humanity knowledge of the gross dimension, the same we can also perceive. In the Surya Siddhanta, very ingenious calculations are given. These calculations allow one to calculate the position of a planet at any given time. Nowadays, the calculations of orbits and planets is done by complex softwares that takes a lot of processing power to run, while the calculations in the Surya Siddhanta were developed to be simple enough to be solvable by hand. This knowledge was used by sages in older times to calculate the position of different planets, eclipses, etc. Calculations necessary for performing astrological calculations, which were taken very seriously by people of antiquity. This knowledge has thus a practical application. The description offered by the Puranas, on the other hand, was given to humanity by higher beings and thus described their view of the cosmos. These beings live in a subtle dimension and have a much higher level of consciousness and different set of senses. It may sound strange that different beings could have such different conceptions of reality, but this is actually something that could be observed even on our own planet. Carnivorous animals like tigers see in black and white, while we see in colors. Butterflies can see ultraviolet light that is invisible to us, while certain animals can't see at all, being guided only by smell. In fact, our concept of reality is based on electrical signals our brain receives from our eyes, nose, ears, etc. If one would receive a different set of senses, he would perceive reality in a different way. In other words, we can only understand the world to the extent of our senses allow it. The same way a person that is completely blind will never be able to understand what color is, the limitations of our senses prevent us from seeing and understanding many things that are experienced by higher beings. Apart from physical differences, there is also a difference in consciousness. The concept of reality of an ant is rudimentary if compared to a human being, for example. Similarly, our concept of reality is very limited if compared to the view of more evolved beings. For us, the numerous planets and stars that compose the universe are arranged in a more or less random fashion in several galaxies. For the Devas, however, planets and stars are grouped according to the level of consciousness of their inhabitants. Therefore, planets inhabited by beings of higher consciousness are grouped together, and similarly, planets of beings of lower consciousness are grouped together. However, the planets of the higher beings are very far from the planets of lower beings. This leads to a hierarchical perception of the universe, which is described in the Puranas. We can better understand how the universe may be perceived so differently by different beings with a simple example. In the same room, we can have different frequencies of radio signals like AM, FM, TV, 3G, 4G, Wi-Fi, etc., each one carrying a particular set of information. Although all the signals are simultaneously available, the one one can tune in depends on the device he is using. One that is using an old radio will be able to capture only sound, while others with a television will be able to also see images. One with a phone, on the other hand, will have access to the internet, which includes much more content, including the radio and TV programs. In the TV, programs are organized in a linear way, and therefore 2 chapters of the same series may be very distant from each other. One may have to wait a long one may have to wait for a whole week, while on the internet, the same programs are organized by topic and one can go from one episode to the next effortlessly. On the TV, an episode of the same series may be closer to a news program that is exhibited immediately after it, while the next episode may be very far, being exhibited only in the next week. But on the internet, things are organized in a semantic way, and therefore one that is using the internet see them close to each other in the same site or playlist, while the news program may be distant in a completely different address. Similarly, our universe is composed of different dimensions, and space is organized in different ways according to the dimension one is living. Not only reality is much more complex. Okay, sorry about that. I got a little bit of a distraction. Similarly, our universe is composed of different dimensions, and space is organized in different ways according to the dimension one is living. Not only reality is much more complex than we can perceive with our senses, but different beings have different sets of senses and can perceive the universe in different ways. Just like the conception of reality of a human is much more evolved than the concept of reality of an ant, superior beings perceive the universe in a very different way than we do. For the devas, everything is much closer, and they can travel from one planet to the other the same way we go to the supermarket. One can syntonize these different dimensions according to the particular set of senses he got, which is in turn determined by his previous consciousness. According to the Vedas, our concept of reality is determined according to our consciousness. Because of our consciousness, we assume a particular type of body on a certain planet and have access to a certain level of reality. In our case, we live in a gross dimension where the universe appears cold and almost vacant, with the stars and planets very distant from each other and are practically inaccessible for us. We are essentially imprisoned in our little planet by the law of gravity. Even if we send some probes or astronauts at an exorbitant cost to investigate what is beyond, they can't find anything very interesting outside. Interplanetary pathways. One key factor to understand how superior beings have such a different concept of space than we do is the existence of interplanetary pathways. It's described, for example, that certain passages in the Himalayas connect our planet to the celestial planets, but only persons with a certain level of consciousness can access such passages. In the Mahabharata is described how the Pandavas ascended to the place of Kuvera, the king of the Yakshas, through one of these pathways. For one who is able to cross these pathways, the other parts of Jambudvip are just a walk away, and therefore the Srimad Bhagavatam describes these different interconnected fragments as a continuous area, which is exactly the perception of one who is traveling through them. Although in our sense perception, these different parts of the structure are spread through different planets. This explains the huge dimensions of the geographical details of Jambudvip described in the Srimad Bhagavatam. The mountains described there are not found on our planet, at least not in our gross dimension, but qualified people can access these geographical locations situated in other parts of the cosmos through these subtle passages. For one who doesn't have the proper qualification, however, the pathways are invisible and he will be stuck on this planet. As a result, when he crosses the Himalayas, he goes to China instead of the celestial planets. One way to understand how this can be possible is by a simple example. Imagine two tall buildings built beside each other. Normally, to go from an apartment on the top of the first building to another on the top of the second, one would have to go all the way down and then all the way up, which could be a long way. If he had access to a walkway between the two buildings, he could go from one apartment to the other very easily. For him, the distance between the two apartments would be very short, while for the other people, they had to take the long way. It would still be very far. Similarly, a person who could use the pathway would have the perception that the two apartments form a continuous area instead of being part of two separate buildings. In the same way, the fact that the Devas can travel easily through the universe makes their concept of space very different from ours. The existence of connected objects that are far apart, as well as shortcuts that allow one to access places that are far away, may seem fantasious, but these ideas are also discussed in modern physics with the phenomenon of quantum entanglement and the theory of the wormholes, for example. All right, I'm going to stop here as a part 1 and continue with part 2, talking about the subtle vertical dimension.